Hi, we were at the auction and Juliana had bid on this nice kid, John Trulock, and she got her friend to kind of like up the bids to make it sound like it was more than just her bidding. And she sat there and watched Shelly and Miranda team up to bid on Bryce, and it was really upsetting her. It was a little strange meeting up with John and walking over to the multipurpose room for lunch, but he was just so nice, and I think grateful that I'd bid, that by the time we got situated at our table, I wasn't feeling so awkward or silly. It was just lunch. Things would have been easier if they hadn't seated me in direct view of Bryce and his little harem, but I did my best to ignore them. John told me all about his radio controlled airplane that he and his dad were building from scratch and how he'd been working on it for nearly 3 months, and that over the weekend they were finally going to get to try it out. He told me a funny story about soldering the wires wrong and practically starting a fire in their basement. And I asked him about how a radio controlled airplane works because I didn't really understand it. So I'd relaxed a lot and was actually having a good time eating lunch with John. And I was so relieved that I hadn't bid on Bryce. What a fool I would have made of myself. Watching Shelley and Miranda fawning all over him didn't bother me nearly as much as I thought it would. Really, they looked ridiculous. John asked about my family, so I was telling him about my brothers and their band when a huge commotion broke out over at Bryce's table. Suddenly, Shelley and Miranda were rolling on the floor like an enormous fur ball, smearing each other with food. Out of nowhere, Bryce appeared at our table. He grabbed my hand and pulled me a few feet away and whispered, "Do you like him?" I was stunned. He held my other hand and asked again, "Do you like him?" "You mean John?" "Yes." I can't remember what I said. He was looking into my eyes, holding my hands tight, and then he was pulling me toward him. My heart was racing, and his eyes were closing, and his face was coming toward mine right there in front of all the other basket boys and their dates and the adults. He was going to kiss me. To kiss me. I panicked. I had been waiting all my life for that kiss, and now I yanked free and ran back to my table. And when I sat down, John whispered, "Did he just try to kiss you?" I turned my chair away from Bryce and whispered, "Can we please talk about something else? Anything else?" People were whispering and looking my way, and when Shelley Sauls came back from cleaning up in the washroom, everyone fell quiet. Her hair looked awful. It was sort of oiled to her scalp and still had little chunks of food in it. She glared at me so hard, it looked like she was trying to get laser beams to shoot from her eyes. A couple of adults steered her back to her seat, and then everyone started whispering double speed, and Bryce didn't even seem to care. He kept trying to come over to talk to me, but either he'd get intercepted by a teacher or I would dash away from him before he had a chance to say anything. When the dismissal bell finally rang, I said a quick goodbye to John and bolted out the door. I couldn't reach my bike fast enough. I was the first one off campus, and I pedaled home so hard it felt as though my lungs would burst. Mrs. Stubbe was out front watering her flower bed, and she tried to say something to me, but I just dropped my bike in the driveway and escaped into the house. I certainly did not want to talk about roosters. My mother heard me slamming doors and came to check on me in my room. "Juliana, what's wrong?" I flipped over on my bed to face her and wailed, "I'm so confused. I don't know what to think or feel or do." She sat down beside me on the bed and stroked my hair. "Tell me what happened, sweetheart." I hesitated, then threw my hands up in the air. "He tried to kiss me." My mother struggled to not let it show, but underneath her composed expression was a growing smile. She leaned in a little and asked, "Who did?" "Bryce." "But you've always liked him." The doorbell rang and rang again. My mom started to get up, but I grabbed her arm and said, "Don't get that." The bell rang again, and almost right after that, there was a loud knocking at the door. "Mom, please, don't get it. That's probably him. But, sweetheart, I was over him, completely over him. Since when? Since last Friday, after the dinner. If he had vanished from the face of the earth after our dinner at the Loskys, I wouldn't have cared. Why? Did something happen at the dinner that I don't know about? I threw myself back onto my pillow and said, it's too complicated, Mom. I can't talk about it just now. My, she said after a moment, don't you sound like a teenager? I'm sorry, I whimpered, because I knew I was hurting her feelings. I sat up and said, Mom, all those years I liked him, I never really knew him. All I knew was that he had the most beautiful eyes I had ever seen, and his smile melted my heart like the sun melts butter. But now I know that inside he's a coward and a sneak. So I've got to get over what he's like on the outside. My mother leaned back and crossed her arms. Well, isn't this something? What do you mean? She chewed at the side of one cheek, then moved over to chew the other. At last she said, I shouldn't really discuss this. Why not? Because I just shouldn't. Besides, I can tell there are things you don't feel comfortable discussing with me. We stared at each other for a moment, neither of us saying a word. Finally, I looked down and whispered, when Chet and I were fixing up the yard, I told him how we didn't own the house and about Uncle David. He must have told the rest of the family because the day before the Loskys' dinner party, I overheard Bryce and his friend making cracks about Uncle David at school. I was furious, but I didn't want you to know because you'd think they were only inviting us over because they felt sorry for us. You just seemed so happy about being invited for dinner. And you've seemed happier ever since. She smiled and held my hand. I have a lot to be happy about. Then she sighed and said, and I already knew they knew about Uncle David. It was fine that you talked about him. He's not a secret or anything. Wait, how did you know, Mom? Patsy told me. She did? Before the dinner? No, no, after. Patsy's been over several times this week. She's going through a rough time. How come? Mom let out a deep breath and said, I think you're mature enough to keep this inside these four walls, and I'm only telling you because I think it's relevant. I held my breath and waited. And you'll have to wait till next time. And next time, I think we may even finish the book. Wow! All right, we'll find out how this all ends next time. Thanks for stopping by. Stay safe, stay healthy, be kind to one another. See you later.